you all can share that information. Thank you. How's everyone doing? Good, great, woo. Okay. Our next speaker will be David Howard from the National Young Farmers Coalition on Land Access and Credit, or Title V of the Farm Bill. Is David ready? Great. Welcome, David. Thank you.
So my name's David Howard. I work for the National Young Farmers Coalition. I'm not a farmer. My background is all inside government. I used to work in the Senate and then at USDA, and then the last 5.5 years or so I've been with Young Farmers, advocating from the nonprofit side of things. And today I'd like to tell you a little bit about our organization, a little bit about the work that we do, and then a little bit about some of the challenges that young farmers are facing. We did another national survey last year. We did one in 2017 and one last year, and there's some consistent themes there and some interesting takeaways. So I'd like to talk about that. And then there's one priority in particular that I'll speak to. We have a list of priorities that we're working on, and a longer list of things that we're supporting on. I see colleagues from other organizations in the room here. We're supporting their work as well. But I'll focus on one policy today to kind of like paint a bit of a picture of what we're really thinking about for this farm bill. So, National Young Farmers Coalition, we are a coalition of young farmers across the country. We started in 2010, and really the impetus for starting the coalition was young farmers who were communicating with each other from different states across the country. We're realizing that, we're all experiencing a lot of the same challenges. There's a lot of themes here, particularly around land access, particularly around even land that's protected often is unaffordable. And realizing also that there wasn't a national organization that was specifically focused on these generational transition issues, on the issues that young and beginning farmers are struggling with. So that's kind of the beginning of our coalition and our work, and that land access in particular, and really that theme of access and accountability for this new generation is really at the foundation of the work that we do. So a couple other things I wanted to point out here. We specifically also advocate for policies that recognize farming as a public service. And you may have heard about our campaign to help young farmers with student loan debt. But I think it goes beyond that, right? It goes beyond that to just naming that farming is public service, right? Like this is something that deserves a historic investment from Congress, from our institutions. And so that's something that is a theme throughout all of our work, is recognizing the value of what this generation is bringing to the table, right? These are many, many small businesses, but these are also many, many public servants providing an important service. And so I'll come back to that historic investment part in a minute. In terms of our reach, we have about 3,000 dues-paying members. We have about 44 staff and tens of thousands of followers on all of the channels, including our newsletter. We have chapters in 31 states, 48 chapters across 31 states right now. Also, we launched a new strategic plan in 2021, and I'll just mention our mission and vision as stated in that plan, because I think it's really a good framing for the policy work that we do today. Our mission is to shift power and change policy to equitably resource our new generation of working farmers. And I think it's important to understand the shifting power piece is really something that we try to highlight, that the people that we represent, young farmers, often aren't in positions of power, aren't in the decision-making rooms where things are being decided, where the policies that impact their farming futures are being decided. So part of that shifting power is to help farmer leaders to get in those rooms and get in those conversations, and that's a big part of the work that we do. Our vision is for a just future where farming is free of racial violence, accessible to communities, and oriented towards environmental well-being and concerned with health over profit. One of the things that we are trying to do is to challenge capitalism, and you hear that in that concern with health over profit, and that comes in a lot of different ways. It doesn't mean that it's not necessarily anti-capitalist, it's just questioning, is this the way that things have to be? Is there a different way to think about metrics of success and the why of how policies invest in farmers and ranchers and what they're doing? So looking at our network, who are the next generation of working farmers? 80% of respondents to our survey last year identify as first-generation farmers. This is really significant because they're often not coming from farming families. They don't necessarily have those word-of-mouth networks in rural communities across the country. They don't necessarily have access to familial wealth, a family relationship with their local FSA office or NRCS office. And so right off the bat, there's challenges associated with all of that. Importantly, I think when talking about the value of this next generation, with the value that they're bringing to the table, it's important to point out that 86% of respondents identified their growing practices as regenerative. People are talking often about the intersection of agricultural policy and climate policy and how we can get people to transition to better practices. Well, this new generation is already doing the things that we would hope that farmers and ranchers are doing. And 97% of respondents identified using sustainable practices. 83% of respondents named that one of their farm's primary purposes is engaging in conservation or regeneration. Think about that. The primary purpose isn't necessarily for profit. It's stewarding our natural resources and making sure that they're there for future generations. So I'll just quickly name some of the top challenges that were really highlighted through the survey. Access to land continues to be the #1 challenge that young farmers are facing, followed by access to capital and healthcare costs and costs of production and housing and student loan debt. And these are not new. These are themes that continue to come up again and again. So getting to the Farm Bill, we're lucky as advocates. Every 5 years, we get to come up here and advocate for policy change, and it's sort of built in, right? Like, not everybody who works on different issues, such as immigration or labor, necessarily gets a built-in mechanism that they can advocate for every 5 years. So we're lucky, and at the same time, it's hard work. And as Nina was naming earlier, there's a lot to be changed. We have a long way to go to really see our shared vision to be realized. But the Farm Bill is the largest piece of legislation shaping food and agriculture policy for this country. So with our nation's farmers aging out of the field, the average age of the U.S. farmer is 57.5 years old. So with our farmers aging out of the field over the next couple of decades, more than half of all farmland is expected to change hands. And in that transitioning is at risk of being developed and leaving agriculture forever. So we both have a generational transition and a lot of pressure on farmland conversion. So this next Farm Bill will not only determine the next 5 years of policy, but it really sets the table for the future to come as well. So, mentioned land access. For 59% of young farmers who responded to our survey named that finding affordable land to buy was very or extremely challenging. And 65% of BIPOC farmers responding to our survey ranked it as very or extremely challenging. And over half of all respondents said that they currently need more access to land, whether to buy or to lease. So that feeling of, yes, I have certainty, I'm going to be here for a while, the carpet's not going to be yanked out from under me, I can invest in conservation practices, I can grow my business, like that secure land tenure and certainty is what farmers are really screaming for and really need. And so that is our main focus is that issue. And access to capital is closely tied to that, of course. In our survey, 41% of young farmers said that finding access to capital, such as money to start growing their business, was very or extremely challenging. And that number is even higher for BIPOC farmers, 59% for Black farmers, and 54% for all BIPOC farmer respondents. So that brings me to the policy recommendation that I want to focus on today, which is securing and providing a lot of funding for the Increasing Land, Capital, and Market Access Program at USDA. This is a new program. You may not have heard of it, but we think it's very responsive to the concerns that young farmers are bringing to us. And beginning in late 2021, we launched a 1 Million Acres for the Future campaign, really focused on what it would take to make a historic investment in land access and really transition 1 million acres over the next decade to the next generation in an equitable way. And we were talking a lot about the need for a really clear, dedicated, programmatic funding pathway at the department to support locally led land access projects. You have a lot of sort of linear programmatic functions through FSA to help you buy a farm, help you make improvements on the farm, or through NRCS to help you implement practices or to put an easement on some land. But there isn't really a program until this that really sees the complexity of what this new generation is dealing with and is kind of showing up and meeting them where they're at and offering a very flexible and very meaningful programmatic function that they can really engage with. So we're excited to see this, and we are really encouraged by the fact that USDA clearly is listening. Right? They put this program out using Inflation Reduction Act funds last August. $300 million behind this program. They launched it. We were very excited when we saw that, jumped into action trying to get the word out and make sure that there's a good batch of applications. We'll hopefully see those awards later this summer, is what we understand. But this program is focused on providing grants or cooperative agreements that to governmental entities and nonprofit entities to really support underserved farmers in accessing land, in increasing access to capital and markets. And the foundation of the program is on that land access. So every application has to have some sort of land access component. And then sorry? Yeah, it's a mouthful. It's Increasing Land, Capital, and Market Access Program. And so this is in Farm Service Agency. It's currently within the outreach office. And, I think USDA deserves a lot of credit for putting this out there. I think we need to really make it clear to Congress that this is something that we want to see continue, because it doesn't have a home in the Farm Bill yet. It just exists in this piece of legislation that was a moment in time last year. So we need to give it a home, give it some money, and hopefully see that it continues. And of course, we have recommendations for how to improve it. I'm not going to get into all of those details, but I'd be happy to do so if anybody wants to follow up. And I'll also just say that, this program is, and what it's trying to do is clearly in demand. We did a survey in September, right after this program was launched, together with many partners in our network. Folks in this room helped us a lot in getting the word out about this. And 96 organizations responded to that survey. Even in this truncated example of time where there's a short application window, 83 organizations were interested in applying. This is a program they'd never heard of before. Just seeing what it's capable of, yes, we're interested. 34 said that they needed significant support to apply, which I think is also important, right? There's not always the capability to respond to what government programs are putting out there. 22 wanted to apply but didn't have capacity to meet the deadline, and 40 said that they had time to apply but would benefit from guidance and review. So I just highlight those numbers to say, I think this program is responsive. People clearly are interested in it. We're excited to see what these awards look like this summer and tell those stories. But this is a departure. This is a good direction, right? Like Nina was talking earlier about how there's programs that kind of eat around the edges of what we know we need. This is something that is designed with intention from the ground up to be responsive to those needs in a way that is like it's not a set aside, it's not a carve out, it's its own thing. And so I think this is the direction that we need to go in. 3 minutes, thank you, Nina. We have a long way to go before we can see a farm bill that's really that really reflects our values throughout. But we think that we can make this farm bill one that really focuses on land access and really does advance racial equity in some important ways. So I would challenge all the staffers in this room and all the advocates in this room to really push. And I know there's a lot of discussion about how much money is on the table or not on the table. But watching Congress through the last 6 years of 2 very different administrations, I think it's clear that where there's a will, there is a way. And it's not about the money, it's about the policies behind the money. So let's ask for what we need, and Congress can figure out the budget part. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Thank you, David.